Okay, here we go. This is my triple flip table, and I start by making my 2 foot by 2 foot squares, and I need 12 of the same pieces. So I cut that piece of plywood there, it's a piece of OSB, just to have as a simple guide. And I said it in the description of the original video, I kind of personally like hand cutting it like this. I know I'm crazy, but to bring the bandsaw out, and it's a bit messy, and it helps to do it outside like you see me doing in the loading dock, so the mess isn't a big deal. But I just find I get better precise cuts for me to start slinging the bandsaw around, and right now I'm using 24-foot pieces, so for me to break up that stock, and I'd end up being wasteful if I have to kind of cut it to bring it into the shop. And anyway, I laid out that piece of plywood there. That's just some scrap plywood, just so I'd have an exact set of 3 frames. And I knew that if I was locked into that, everything would be perfect. And people are really confused about why I would TIG weld and MIG weld, and it seems sort of really confusing. Honestly, I started TIG welding because it's near that station, and I was listening to a podcast, and I just wanted to just do something quiet and calming. And TIG welding is very calming and quiet. And so that's why I TIG welded. And the other big reason is that Taylor was on the other weld table. She had production set up, so she had frame jigs set up, and I wasn't going to disturb her because she has a lot of work to do. And I figured I could just stand over here and TIG weld. And by the time I actually got to the bigger part of the job, I was on the wooden table. And so here I am just making what's going to be the next step in the process. The way this came about is Craig from Lincoln asked me, hey, let's do a flip table. I've never seen a metal flip table, and I started looking around, and I also never really couldn't find a metal flip table. But a few weeks ago, just before he asked me this, the Pneumatic Addict had made a double-ended flip table. And I thought that was a cool idea, just to maximize the table and make 2 parts that flip up. And what's better than 2? 3. And when I saw the way she did it, where the opposite ends of a long table would flip, it occurred to me that in my personal situation, I would want the table to go against the wall, likely not accessible from either short end, just the whole broad long end. And if I did 3 stations with an open frame, a larger machine could flip toward you and go underneath, and then you'd have the empty surface. And that's really what I was going for, a machine or an empty table. Not necessarily 2 machines, because I have enough room, personally, of course, in this shop. So you usually see that machine 1 over machine 2. I wanted nothing or a machine, and that's really what I was going for. You could certainly put 6, if you have 6 layouts, machines that would fit with the flip. Anyway, you notice me using the Fireball Tools jig clamps that make a perfect square. You notice I keep going to this pile with my new horses on there, and I keep grabbing stock from what was there. And you notice how I left the caps open, but I left them recessed a little bit on that pipe I just added, or that tube I just added. That's because I'm going to cover those later on with the upright that becomes the leg. And now I basically built this table upside down in my mind, and I had to kind of think completely upside down the entire time. And that's going to become the cap for that open-ended pipe. And sometimes I use the bandsaw, sometimes I don't. That bandsaw is my stationary bandsaw. Although it is a portaband, it is in a stationary setting. And there you see. So kind of planning ahead, knowing where and what I'm going to do. Fireball tools again. Those angle jigs are the best. They make everything nice and square. And you notice how square the table came out in the end. It's because I used my Fireball tools. And they have outside corners, inside corners. They have steel. They have aluminum ones. It's pretty amazing. And there you see, so the table's upside down against my table. And there I'm using my MIG welder because it is closest to that table. And actually this is the frame that's going to carry the table at the bottom. And this is a 3x2 tube that I had. It's a 3x2 1/8" tube, so it is altogether a little bit heavier. I bought all this stuff for the build that I did for the This Old House crew, and so all this was left over. I didn't know if we were going to make 3 chairs or 2 chairs or 4 chairs, so we bought enough material to make 3 chairs, and we only ended up making 1. So this is all leftover stock from August shoot with This Old House, and so that's why I used this piece, which because I had used up all the 2x2 tubing in the upper frame, and now this is what was left. So I'm happy. It gives it a nice sturdy look and feel. And just angle grinding it, and there you see one of the outside fireball squares. And these tabs, you know that you're in the right place. Everything's angled and squared. I can't say enough about them. JD loves them as well, and that's when I first saw them. But then I also met the gentleman that owns the tool company when I was at the Barzy Bash in summer in California, and that's how I got my hands on the clamps. So thank you, Fireball Tools. And now I'm welding the locking swivel casters on. I'm welding right through the zinc because I like living on the edge. And if that's what's going to kill me, I've been very lucky till now. And here's the framework. I just brought it and laid it in place, and now I'm welding upside down. My welds aren't great, and I don't claim to be a great welder, but I'm happy that I could make cool shit. I'm not out there claiming I'm best at anything. I just like making cool shit, and if people like it, I'm happy. People get inspired, I'm happy. But you see some of these comments that say, you weld like shit. I say, yeah, I do weld like shit, but you're watching me weld. I'm not watching you weld. Just cleaning up the welds. I did most of that off camera because it is obviously kind of boring. Now I just wanted to make sure that this hinge pin is going to be through everything. So I wanted to make sure from one complete side to the other complete side I had a straight line. Wasn't necessarily measuring off of one corner, then the other corner, then the other corner. I measured the center of one side, then the center of the other side, and then used the straight string. And now I'm using my tapered bits, my sheet metal bits. That's the only way to drill big holes in sheet metal is the step bits. And the last part of the step bit was 3/4, which is where I needed to be. And there you can see how straight those lines were because I used the snap string. And I had to mark and dink with a center punch every single hole that I drilled, and also I center drilled it with a smaller drill bit. So I center punched, then drilled, and then step bit it. And there you see I hammered my 3/4 inch rod through. It was short. You see I hammered it in. You can see the weld right there in that last pocket. And now I bought these pull pins from McMaster-Carr, and Andrew Blacksmith Tools told me about them. He watched my build on Instagram and he said, this is what you need. And boy was he ever correct. They're the coolest things I've ever played with. But it wasn't until I was right here about to build, the camera was ready, I had my whole day planned around building this, that I realized I should have got the 2-inch deep ones. I got the 1.5 inch, which is why I had to make my swing pin go through the top of the leg, which I made that awkward cut there. That's the only thing I regret about this build. But you know what? This is the prototype. I'll make more. And those are welded pull pins, and they work great. You just give a tack and make sure everything's in place. And you don't want to over weld it because you're going to screw up that thread. And now I'm making what's going to actually be locked into those pins. I spent a lot of time off camera getting these holes in the right spot. Now you notice how I put them in the pin, I get my frame level, and then I weld it. And then if the locking plates are going to be above or below where I needed them to be, I would just grind them off, which is what I did in a couple of cases, but I just left it off camera because I was pretty much on point with almost every one of them. Had a flip through the frame, and I didn't cut the back slot until I welded on the front one, and then I flipped it again and locked the plate into the pin and then welded it. So every time, if you notice what I'm doing, I'm putting the plate in the pin and then welding it to the frame. That's just so, see, I put it in the frame, put it in the pin rather, weld it to the frame. And doesn't swing all the way through. I got to grind a little bit off camera, but I burned myself right there. I remember screaming. Locked it. Now I'm checking everything. All the clearances are in place. It only needs to go one way then back. It's not going to flip 180. So it didn't need to flip 180 all the time. It just goes up and back and up and back. Not completely 360 is what I meant to say. This is the framework that's going to carry the sheet of plywood on the bottom. I take advantage of that frame, that 3-inch high frame, and I put my plywood down at the bottom of that frame so that anything that's in that rolling cart will stay in because the framework is above the edge of the plywood. It creates a little trough in there. And this is just black Rust-Oleum. I know I always shit talk Rust-Oleum, but the goopy black stuff in the can is the best stuff actually for painting old tools and this kind of thing. You know, I'm not going for a perfect finish. That finish is a little lumpy and bumpy, but it's glossy and it looks good on camera. Now that's 16 gauge tube, so I am pre-drilling each one of the holes and putting in just I think it's a stainless steel screw that I had, just something from the stock bin. And now I'm doing the other side. And of course I could put plywood on top of the 2-inch tubing to make everything the same height. The reason I didn't is because I just wanted to accentuate the 3 frames on camera. And here we go. And I tell you what, these 3 tools I never use because they're always on the floor. And now I guarantee you I will use them all the time. I just hated dedicating tabletop space to them because they're kind of shitty tools. And I just hated them clogging up counter space. And now I will absolutely use them. So, and there you see those pull pins work. And I could probably bevel the locking plates and so that it just locks and I don't have to actually pull and push on them. But again, I consider this a prototype. I'm probably going to make more. Thank you very much.